Okay, so I believe that Gina and Katie will not be here today, so I'm your facilitator for the day. And we'll start by asking if there are any announcements.
So I have one. I've been talking with an organization called Climate Science. They're a European network. I'll try and find the link in a second, but they've been doing some amazing climate change education work. It's international, but I mean, just like stunning stuff. So related to all the stuff we've been wrestling with forever, but it's very new. And they've just asked me to be like an informal advisor, and they are deep into it.
What's it called? What's it called again?
Climate Science. Climate Science. It's an educational initiative. It's new, but Seth, a lot of stuff Climate Generation's been doing for 15 years is very aligned. The stuff the Clean Collection's been doing and the stuff we've been wrestling with, totally aligned. They get networks of like tons of people to translate all the resources into all these languages. And they've got a science Olympiad, climate science Olympiad that shows up at the COPs. They had one last year. They'll have another one with like 30,000 people. So like there's like out of nowhere, what? So just, another initiative that's very aligned, but, having tactical, like we've learned this, you're trying to learn that kind of conversations, I think is one of the things that makes the Clean Network strong. And we historically tend to be US focused, but there's no reason why other efforts wouldn't benefit from the deep work we've learned the hard way, and no one has to go through that again. So anyway, I'll put the link in here, but I just thought if you're not tracking it, I'll find the right organization.
So are they based out of a particular place in Europe or just Europe in general?
So they're Frank G. They are a kind of like one of those nomadic networks where they've got people all over the place, all over the world. And they have volunteers from all over the world, and they're doing very similar stuff that we are doing, but it's just a very different model. But the guy I've been talking to is out of Germany. Okay. It's definitely European led. Yep. And Seth, you found the Olympiad. Here's the main page for that initiative. So, again, I mean, Tamara, I'm just thinking about like all the work we did in the early days of the Clean Collection, like 2009, 10 kind of hard wrestling stuff.
They're looking for other additional resources. So they're building on a collection.
They're building collections. They have courses. They have a lot of really interesting little innovations that I've never seen before. And they're definitely trying to deploy at a more international level, but they're translating some of the curricular resources into national education standards. So when I saw the Brazilian standards next to the NGSS, next to the French, I've never seen that before. But the fact that the US National Education Standards is called Next Generation Science Standard. They don't say anything about the US. The other ones is like Brazilian, French, German, and then it's Next Generation Science Standards, which is weird. It's, it's the same. They've skillfully done it right, but they're looking at our standards and building things related to that, but also other international standards. So anyway, I just thought that was an exciting new effort.
Okay, great. Thanks. Any other announcements?
Seth Spencer with Climate Generation. The Summer Institute for Climate Change Education kicks off on Monday of next week. I know at least a few of you will be there this year, but yeah, it's happening.
Great, thank you. Jim, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, sure, thank you, Tamara. So I'm gonna make an announcement with starting off with a query. I think most folks who are pay attention on science stuff are aware of the James Webb Telescope, new images that are coming out that President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris were part of announcing yesterday. So it's a pretty big deal. It's one of the great prides of NASA and American-built science. So the query would be, where does NASA go to find programming and material that can engage the public live and hands-on to see how James Webb works? Where do they get that? Do they get that from astronomy-based organizations? Do they get that from people who are into space probes? No, they went to basically a member of the Clean Network, because Mobile Climate Science Labs has specialized in infrared energy and light and how it works and connecting with it. We've done it for years. We have it very well refined. We're the ones who know how to do it, because that's what the James Webb Telescope focuses on, infrared light. And we do not oversimplify it and say infrared is heat and infrared is something else than light. We've been approaching it from a scientific perspective for a long time. So anyway, as Eric Hava would know, on the West Coast now, pretty much the premier visitor center for NASA is at now Chabot Space and Science Center. Chabot has redefining itself to largely be a NASA facility. And so they've asked us, because we have the labs, to please give a presentation at their James Webb big debut coming up. And one of the things that comes back about, so I mean, part of it is, again, to wherever we're clean can show off of, look, we do more than, we may do climate science, we do climate action, but that has many applications and many very important parts of science. But part of it was also cool is, in order to do this, they need us to do a training for approximately 70 interns and high school students who work at Chabot. And so we got 70 students who are going to be learning our labs in order to bring that out regularly at Chabot. And what immediately happened, because we had already been connected with students there that want to do work on climate change specifically and climate action. So I have to, just be real clear and real careful. We're not coming in to force Chabot to do things on climate change, but I don't think the volunteers are going to allow it not to, right? They want to do stuff on climate change and do things around NASA, and they'll do the James Webb part, but we've got a lot of students who are very dedicated to doing public service, looking at that. So that's a pretty cool development. I wanted to wait till we're right on top of it before I brought up this announcement, but good. I think I mean it to be good for the entire network. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. Emily, you have your hand raised.
Yes. So our team has been working on a project that we just launched and went live with. It's a new website for kids. I think the target age range is more about 5-year-olds to 10-year-olds, because a lot of our content on our site is a little bit older and so we used to have web weather for kids way back in the day. We scrapped that and went for something that's a little bit more engaging. And we also wanted to have climate resources on there too, and climate games and activities. So I just wanted to share it with everyone here, let you know that it's available, but there's some cute characters and some fun games. So feel free to share widely.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other announcements?
Hello.
Hi, Shelley, go ahead.
Yes, I'm trying to talk to Eric, and Lori just called me and said that she can't she can't get in with the link that she has. So if somebody could send her the link again, it's Lori Jolie.
Could you put the email in the chat, and then I'll send the link?
Okay, all right, I will do that. Thank you.
Okay, any other announcements? Go ahead, Frank.
So I don't know if when this came out, this NAAE MEES report on monitoring and evaluating climate change, communication, and education projects. I'm sorry, that's not the right name. K-12 climate change education policy in the United States. Back on June 9th.
We have some background noise here. Can you please mute?
Yep, there it is. Sorry. If this report came out on June 9th from NAAE, if you haven't seen it, I don't know if we talked about it in the network. I don't remember that, but it might be something you want to check out.
Shelley, I need her email address. I don't have access to the.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. All right.
Okay, are there any other announcements? Well, if not, we have Eric Havel is going to basically lead a conversation about the UN's COP27 plans. So Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Tamara. And would it be possible to share screen? I just have a couple of slides that I wanted to kick it off with.
I think you should be able to. Why don't you go ahead and try? And if you can't, then I will search for how to make that happen. Okay, great. And then just for the group too, there's a number of folks that are on the call for the first time this morning. So I want to say hi to Claudia, to Shelley, to Alex, and potentially to Lori. They're part of a collaborative project that we're working on that we're just briefly going to introduce. But each of them is working in the climate space as well. So, and are just excited in general about joining the Clean Call today for the first time. And then just to frame the conversation, I'm hoping that, you know, I'm by no means an expert on COP. So it was really just sort of a, hey, let's talk about COP because it's coming up in November. Maybe this is the first of a number of calls where we address it and sort of, you know, follow up accordingly. So that just kind of wanted to frame expectation around it. It's really just a brainstorm, and hopefully everyone, especially folks new to the call, can kind of jump in and express interest. So let me see if I can share this. Tell me if you all can see it okay. Yes.
Okay, awesome. So this year, as I think most folks know, the COP conference, COP27, is taking place in Egypt, Sheikh Salam, and it's in sort of southern Egypt. And this is just some stuff I pulled off of the COP sort of website, the UN-based website, looking at the venue. It's taking place in a part of Egypt that's actually sort of designed to host international events. And so there's a big conference center. Some folks have asked, like, well, why isn't it in Cairo this year, or, you know, something, a significantly bigger city? But this location, one, it's got a lot of sustainability assets in place. So I think that's one of the reasons. It's also, like I said, set up to host large venues. So anyway, that's my understanding, and I'm sure there's other significant reasons. But again, not being an expert, kind of wanting to lean in on with a few of you that have been involved, because I know a number of us have been involved in one way or another with the COP conferences in the past. So these were just some framing questions I thought we could consider as we're sort of talking about it. Who attends COP conferences? What happens? What gets accomplished? How does it lay out? And who on the call today? I know specifically that Frank G, you've attended the conference. Alex Tarzikian, who's on the call with us today, has attended. She attended last year. And others, I think, of you have either attended or are very well aware of the logistics behind them. So just kind of an idea sharing and past experiences in particular. And then maybe leaning on you a little bit, Frank, for some, and Tamara for some sort of global perspective, like how does Clean get involved in COP? What type of things could Clean, how could we support it, even remotely, even not necessarily attending? And then I just want to briefly have the team, the new folks that are here on the call that are part of this project collaborative that we just got started. And Shelley Ryan and I are sort of the initial main coordinators for this project idea. Just to share some of your background in the climate space. We actually have Claudia on the call from Italy and doing a lot of great climate work in Italy. So Frank, she missed your introduction to that to that climate literacy resource. So maybe just we'll share that out again in chat. But just any specific things that Clean is doing that would be relevant at COP, I think would be sort of one of the framing questions. And then this idea that we're sort of working on together, this collaborative, we'll share that briefly. And I'll just, if you don't mind, I'll just share that initial idea, and then we'll maybe start with those framing questions just for some perspective. So the idea is around climate storytelling, and we've talked a lot about this. I've mentioned this concept. It's what brought me into the climate space in the first place, was this idea that there are shared climates around the world. We have climate analogs, brothers and sisters around the world. In California, it's the Mediterranean climate. And there's 5 of them around the globe. And so our idea, this collaborative, is to build an international network that would really sort of work together, would share stories, impact and solution stories from these 5 regions, with the idea that because COP is taking place in a Mediterranean zone, country, Egypt is in the Mediterranean climate region, there's an opportunity to sort of present this idea of building a collaborative around analogs and brothers and sisters around the world. And these regions are very significant. They have large human populations. They provide a lot of our world's food supply, human food supply. They're biologically diverse, and they have interesting biomes in that they have very resilient plants. They're sort of characterized by what in California we call a chaparral environment. And then the bigger idea is to create a replicable model that for sharing diverse stories. And there's many out there, as we know, for folks collaborating around educational and solution story kind of opportunities. So creating a model for collaboration, an additional model for that. So those were some of our sort of driving objectives with this collaboration in mind. So I'm gonna just stop sharing my screen there and really just wanted to open it up for conversation around those initial framing questions. Who's been to COP, what happens there? And again, leaning in on some of you that have some of that background.
So Eric, just a couple key things. I'm a U.S. federal civil servant, and I've represented the U.S. government at COPs in the past from the government side, a party side. I was part of the delegation for the COP21 to give us the Paris Agreement, and I've supported other COPs. And the other thing I do in the U.S. UNFCCC process is write the national communications as it relates to education, public awareness, workforce development, capacity building, public access to climate information, repeatedly since 2007. So I'm deeply involved in that. And then I was an ACE national focal point for the United States. I am rolling off of that position, but I understand that process incredibly well. But the other thing I would say is from the non-governmental side, the stakeholders or all the organizations that come to the COP process to work with parties as countries, is actually where I see most of the power and potential of this work. So the fact that you're going and representing that, I know Frank G, you've been there and others in this call, but Climate Generation has been there for many, many years. And Seth, you represent their work. But one of the things I think is a powerful connection between CLEAN and all the work we do and the COP process is one of the struggling areas of ACE or Article 6, Article 12, whatever you want to call that group of activities, is coordination and collaboration. In the treaty from '92, it says we should do all these things to support climate action and collaborate internationally. One of the weakest parts of all of this effort is the collaboration architectures. CLEAN has built for a very long time a collaboration coordination architecture at a national mostly level, where you have, where we can bring some value is that we have a lot of depth and expertise, and we also have a lot of commitment to this work so we can actually learn. One of the opportunities here is these bridging architectures, infrastructures that allow us to collaborate, not just domestically, but also internationally. But that network there's a lot of network that is left to be built. Where it exists, the collaboration impulse is very natural for us, but we don't have that bridge into other things. ECOS was going to be something like that. It really hasn't established itself that way. So we're well networked in the country, but we're not well networked beyond the country.
Thanks so much for that framing perspective, Frank. And I think that's interesting. And I think trying to build this internet, and thank you, Tamara. Lori's on the call, and she's calling in from France, by the way. So Lori, welcome as well. And I think that's what we're sort of trying to figure out with this collaboration is how can you build an international network without necessarily having funding, right? Because a lot of funding is very country focused, right? So if you need a resource, in a funding resource, then how do you do that? And so, yeah, but I'm going to go over to Frank G, because I know you attended last year in person in Glasgow. Some thoughts.
Okay. Actually, last year was about the third COP I've attended. And one of the things about, so I'm going to give a perspective as somebody who's been an observer from a civil society organization. Because for 2 years we went as observers from Quaker Earth Care Witness. And first year was Climate Central. And in any case there, one of the things that, I'm going to sound like a broken record because I've done this, I've actually given this talk on these calls before, but one of the biggest things to me, if you want my input in terms of what clean could really contribute to, is we had the experience of going to the COPs and then coming back, talking with college courses, churches, community groups, etc., and getting lots and lots of blank stares. Kind of like, what was this that went on? We didn't even know this was going on. Why should we care? Sort of thing. And one of the things that was pretty exceptional about COP26 this last year is because the pandemic forced us into a new mode, there was a lot more reliance on this kind of medium that we're using right now to be able to make connections. And we had done something like that in the Portland area back in 2019 for COP25, of actually having gatherings that were connecting to people on the ground in Madrid. And that is something that, having that experience, the groups that I was working with were saying, we need to figure out how to do this in other places. And there are, in fact, lots and lots of examples of folks doing this in other places. Climate Reality Europe in Scotland that had their climate cafes where they're connecting remote communities in Scotland to what was going on in Glasgow. Some of you know Miro Polzer. He's been involved with the People's COP, which was in by and large sort of remote connectivity. That's become sort of my mission right now, to figure out how to enable that in as many communities as possible. So anyway, that's my soapbox. I'll get off of it now.
No, but I think that's a great reminder, Frank, about the power of sort of digital and virtual conferencing and what COVID, sort of one of those silver linings we've talked about, quite a bit in these calls, and what's it really enabled, Claudia and Lori in particular being, 8 hours offset from us in time zone, and potentially, collaborating worldwide, even so just this ability to sort of network at that scale in a more sort of personal environment where you can see and collaborate and talk to folks. So I think that's a great reminder of that. And just maybe others that have attended. Alex, I know you're on the call. Not sure if you're able to talk right now if you're in the middle of work, but Alexandra attended the conference last year in person. She does a lot of refugee work in Central Europe and North Africa, and is a fellow doing a fellowship here in the US. But she attended in person, saw a video. So I created a video, as a lot of you know, Deb Morrison, under Deb Morrison's kind of leadership in partnership with digital storytellers that got presented. And I attended the UN conference virtually, to your point, Frank, did not go in person, but still got something out of it and was able to present this video, which Alex had a chance to see. And as a result, we linked up through LinkedIn. So there's really more and more opportunity, but I think we talked about it, right after COP26, that the UN infrastructure is pretty archaic in a lot of ways. So they're still challenged with how to actually make virtual stuff work effectively. So I think that's something that a lot of other orgs are ahead on. Seth, in particular, looking at you and the what's you're going to do with the conference. It looks like he's jumped off the call, but they're running a virtual institute, and they have stuff going on all over the country, as they presented a few weeks ago. So in a lot of ways, a lot of folks are doing this pretty effectively, but we're still on this learning curve. So Alex, I don't know if you had any thoughts, or Claudia, I know you have some specific ways that you're thinking about working, that Italy is thinking about working with the whole COP process this year. So and Tamara, I think you had maybe had some thoughts too.
Yeah. So
oh, go ahead. I'll go ahead afterwards.
Okay. Well, you can go ahead first. It's fine.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Eric, for including me on this call and for the kind introduction. I apologize I can't be on camera. But yeah, I attended COP as well, mostly as an observer, because we had a project looking at the intersection of climate change and conflict and peace building in Somalia, and looking at that nexus. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to attend through Northwestern, and I got to attend the Blue Zone, which I think is really an interesting space, just because that's kind of where the negotiations happen. There are a lot of interesting side events, and it's mostly kind of a closed space. It's definitely harder, I think, to attend the Blue Zone, but I would say it's definitely worthwhile if you have ECOSOC status, which is the status that is required to be able to attend some of these UN conferences. The Green Zone is mostly the public-facing kind of space. It's usually used as a space for the public to be able to learn and host different events on climate change, including workshops and creative art events, and I think also can have some interesting events there. But like kind of Eric said, I think it's still very bureaucratic, the whole process. In order to apply, if you don't have this ECOSOC status, you need to be able to apply, I think, a year in advance. And so if you miss the deadline last August, you probably won't be able to attend unless you have this ECOSOC status. But otherwise, I think, using these conferences mostly as networking opportunities and creating and using it as an opportunity for coalition building, I think is really important. There are only a handful of local communities that are coming from the South that are able to attend, because of visa restrictions. And so, having the opportunity to engage virtually, I think has been great to see. And I hope to continue to see more of that. But yeah, I think there's still definitely challenges. But overall, I think if you use it to kind of develop coalitions and meeting more people who are working in the space, I think opportunities like that can be very effective.
Thanks so much for sharing that personal experience too, Alex, and the green and blue zone distinction, I think is really important. Tamara.
Okay, so this is a little bit different, but it's a group that has a definite international reach, but it focuses on one particular set of tools. And Frank, you just went for the training for En-ROADS, but Climate Interactive has over 500 En-ROADS climate ambassadors now. And they are truly, if you go to their website, you will see which ones are in Africa and which ones are in Europe and which ones are in Asia, and all over the world. And what it's done for me, most of my events have been in the United States, but it was reached out by some group that is in South America, and they wanted somebody to facilitate that spoke Spanish. And so we were able to actually identify an En-ROADS ambassador in South America that could address this to their particular issues. They have events, they run their, so they'll have events that will introduce either anybody to climate, to En-ROADS, or they have events for ambassadors that help them learn how to use the newer features. But they generally run these events twice on a day, 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern time and 2 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time, hoping to make a time that's relatively convenient for the majority of people in the world. But my point is, it's truly an international reach, and it may be worthwhile thinking about, and they may actually, I know that their earlier model, C-ROADS, was used at COP21. So they actually do have connections to COP. So it may be worthwhile thinking about bringing him into the conversation to how you might want to have a more connected, networked interaction at the COP.
Thanks so much for sharing an additional network, Tamara. So I'm kind of going back to Frank G, what you'd said about climate reality, which actually, by the way, is what brings Lori, Claudia, Shelley, and I together, because we were all part of the climate reality trainings, you know, in the last few years. Shelley and I had a relationship before that, in that we worked together at Chabot. She was part of our intern program. So she and I are sort of bringing this thing together, but it's a reminder that there's many networks out there. I think that, and it's important, we're really thinking about with this project specifically to do something sort of a catered presentation for the Climate Reality Project, but I could imagine, Tamara, something also for the En-ROADS team, just introducing it. And Tamara also introduced me to a colleague of hers in Chile, who is a retired government official, actually, who's now dedicating the rest of his life to sort of climate change in Chile, and is also looking out sort of on this international sort of realm and sort of trying to think about how we work together. And I think one of the powerful messages in the international realm is that we know this is a global phenomenon. We often get lost in the nuts and bolts of dealing with it domestically. And like you said earlier, Frank G, you know, for us, COP is a big deal. We get it, but you jump out of this bubble space and people are like, what does that mean? What is COP even all about? And then also in a similar vein, you know, what's happening internationally may not be as important to many folks. They're focused on domestics, right? So, but there's powerful stories to be told when you learn that other climate zones like California are experiencing the same things: wildfires, water shortages, food supply issues, inequity, you know, impacts that are impacting folks in a very different proportional levels, and sort of, and these regions are very diverse culturally as well, which is fascinating to me. In particular, the Mediterranean basin has got a vast number of countries, many different cultures represented. Socioeconomics is across the map. So there's just a real opportunity to uplift stories and find solution stories that are really impactful at a very local level. The work that Alex is doing with the refugees in particular, I think is very powerful, because it's, as we know in Syria, for example, it's a multiplier. You know, climate change on top of all of the refugees and the war and things that are happening becomes a really significant event for folks that are dealing with that, but also an opportunity to really uplift those stories and find out on the ground what folks are doing. I wanted to give Claudia a chance, just because I know we're going to share something, Claudia, and then I'll go to Frank N.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy to be here, and as Eric said, I'm in charge of studying and working on the impact of food technology on climate change, and I work currently for the Future Food Institute, that is a no-profit organization working on this issue and on food innovation. So I'm here to better understand which might be my contribution for the work that probably we could do together toward the COP27, yes, and not only during the COP, but also toward the COP, as people and our global community. I work with young people. We train people together with FAO. I work with executives of big food industries. So it's a very multi-stakeholder platform of target audience that I work with. They really need to raise their awareness on the specific issues of the COP and to perceive that that agenda is not separated from their own daily basis life. It's not something just political, but it's something that we definitely should better know, and we can also work to give a direction in order to accelerate the impact of certain food policies. So that's the reason why I proposed to Eric and Shelley and Laure to organize together this series of Instagram interviews from our side as an informal group to experts that can be very different people coming from United Nations, but also scientists, entrepreneurs, startups, and even farmers, fishermen, people that actually, are affected by climate change, the fragile communities, the women empowerment associations, the indigenous communities. We already have done it both last year, but above all, we organized with FAO this digital marathon with more than 160 speakers from more than 100 countries. And then we published 2 books related. In that case, it was the food sustainability, the main topic. So we are ready to do that. As a Future Food Institute, we can be in charge for the production of the series, to organize the interviews, and I really would like to know if we can do that together, because otherwise we can do it alone, but I think it's very like the opposite of the message that we want to do by speaking about climate change.
Thanks so much, Claudia, for sharing that opportunity and the experience you have in that sort of realm of international connections and also creating, and the food connection. I wanted to just mention that Shelley specifically has a background in looking at the nexus of climate change and our food choices. And I know we've had a number of presentations on clean around that. So Shelley, I don't know if you want, before Frank G jump to you, Shelley, did you want to say just a little bit about your work in that space and your interest in that?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes, I've been interested in the close connection between climate change, our food choices, different agricultural ways of working with the land for about 6 years or so. And I went ahead and last year I received a certificate from Cornell University in the United States on food and sustainability. And I also took a certificate class ending also last year from Yale University on food, climate change, and health. And I learned a tremendous amount from both of those institutions. But this idea of climate change being tremendously affected by our food choices and agriculture is just something that's starting to take hold. I would say internationally, but definitely just starting to take hold in the United States. But there are quite a number of people who are working on this issue, and I'm very interested in it, and would really like to be personally be part of what you're doing, Claudia, in this regard. So I think this is, there are some people who are saying, Salish Rao, for instance, a physicist from India, who's looking at this issue, he said that all the aspects of our food production is causing about 80% of climate change. I don't know if it's that high, but from what I've seen, I'd say it's at least 50%. There's, all of us eat about 3 times a day, and everything that brings the food to our table, it has a huge impact. And I would say it's at least 50% causation there for what's happening with climate. So I'm very interested in this and want to pursue it very actively.
Thanks for sharing some of that background, Shelley. Both Franks, so maybe starting with Frank G and then over to Frank Niepold.
Why don't you go on ahead and let Frank Niepold talk, because my phone's ringing in the background.
So for those of you who don't know the Clean Network, I thought a little context might be helpful. There are about 800 people in the United States focused on climate and energy literacy. It's been shifting more to climate empowerment, more of the ACE dimensions, but it's definitely in an action orientation, not just a passive learning mode. Of those 800 people, we've recently been doing some network analysis. There's a whole cloud of people around those 800 people that are interested but not networked as tightly as we are. Just in the United States, that's just one part. There are other related networks in higher education, informal education, extension, but I think what it typifies is, and that's just this country, it's a big, complicated country, but it's still, still just one country, sort of. But the point about collaborations, the conversation we're having here about, I'm interested in this, oh, I want to join you. The thing that I see when we go to the international level and then back down to the subnational in another part of the world is that there's a wealth of people who could naturally collaborate all over the place. And now we've learned better tools on how to collaborate with very limited, no flying, free internet calling, international calling, I meant, same thing, right? But the building those relationships and then helping, guide people to those other people so that you have some kind of coherence here is a really important impulse in this work. The parties historically have not supported this adequately. And so it leaves it up to the civil society to really build those bridges much more effectively than the parties themselves. I think all too often, the civil society go and put pressure on the governments to do this. And I've received the pressure, I've contributed to the pressure. It's not moving. And so I think that self-organized networks for this purpose is really important. That said, there is a COP26, 27, really looking at the implementation of the Glasgow Work Program for Action for Climate Empowerment. That is part of what came out of the SB this year, is really looking at that. I think that understanding that landscape and seeing who else is interested in that and how do we build those relationships, like you're talking, Eric, about LinkedIn, simple tools, good relationships. We can do it this way. And the people who go to COPs is a very, very small fraction of who's interested in working in this space.
Yeah, I think that just reminded me of this, again, learning from the models that each say, let's at the sort of national level, as you're saying, we have a structure and lots going on in this country that can help inform other countries doing similar work and vice versa, right? Similar, and then there's the power of bringing the grassroots together across country spaces too. I think there's just a lot there. So Frank.
Yeah, and Frank, your last comment was a good segue into what I was wanting to say. The idea that there's a lot more people out there who would like to be involved with the process that aren't. And then of course you've also got a lot of people who aren't even familiar with the process. Going back to the idea of the virtual conduits. I mean, what in the work that I've done with that, what I have tried to shoot for is how to essentially give that kind of opportunity to more people. In other words, create developing virtual observers. Incidentally, Eric, one thing is Eric or Frank, I'm not sure which of you guys made the comment that that the UN is kind of archaic and it's not up to speed so much on when you look at their apps that they give for all the COPs, I would tend to agree with that. However, at the same time, you can also get recordings of side sessions back to COP 21. And there's just this huge library of recorded sessions where you can practically attend a lot of these sessions without flying there. That being said, one of the things is, I think when you're looking at the issue of giving people opportunities to become virtual observers, kind of go to the question of what does an observer do? And when you're talking about storytelling, that's certainly part of it. I mean, one of the richest conversations either Annette or I've had has been in the line waiting for coffee. And you end up talking to somebody, oh, I'm a delegate, or I'm an observer from thus and such, or talking to the folks at the exhibit halls. I mean, I'm a museum person from a long ways back, and so I love exhibit halls, and because it's really rich. So trying to figure out opportunities for that. But then one of the other things about it is what Frank was just talking about, the issue of lobbying. I mean, as to some extent, being there does give you that opportunity to bump into a delegate and say, what's going on here? And then there are, of course, those sessions which you do have that opportunity to bump into because they are open sessions. A lot of them are closed. If they're the Arab countries, you can guarantee they're closed. Sorry, I hope I didn't insult anyone with that one, but that being said, one of the things about the official negotiations, I kind of liken them to the few chances I've attended. I kind of liken them to root canals, and just in terms of the pleasantness of it, I guess. But part of that is just simply I don't understand it, and trying to connect people virtually with what's happening in the negotiating halls is a real struggle. Tamara and I was thinking about En-ROADS in this respect of being able to run an En-ROADS simulation in different cities concurrently with what's happening in Egypt. So folks get some experience with trying to think in those terms and then see what's actually happening.
You could potentially do that. I mean, I've done, through my connections with the MIT alumni clubs, I did an event for the MIT Alumni Club of Germany. And it actually had people participating from all over Europe, not just Germany.
Sweet. Yeah, and I've actually reached out to a number of, I've got 3 different schools I'm alumni from and reached out to all 3 of them to see if they've got groups. So I want to be touching bases with you more about MITs.
Okay.
I think,
anyway,
yeah.
Thank you. But it reminded me, I wanted to pick up on that strand of the power of that in-person experience and the networking piece, because I saw Alex had chimed in chat, and I think we've all been to conferences, and this is our, I mean, COP used in another way, right? So not just the convening of the partners, but the community of practice, right? This network, this session that we do every week is a community of practice. You know, when Jim and I talk shop about working with students in the Bay Area, we are sort of that's our community of practice, right? You know, Lori and I, when we were on a call with Shelley, shared stories about, you know, your experience, Lori, with the way the Mediterranean basin is heating up, and thinking about the kind of plants that you're planning to plant, you know, and change your whole garden scenario in the same way that we're doing in California. You know, we're shifting to drought tolerant or zero water spaces. So I think the power of so many of the professional development sessions that I've been part of or led, you always want to leave space for the participants to just share with each other, because there's so much learning that just happens right there in that community of practice, you know, with the experts just talking and meeting with each other. So I think that's really important, to just keep those spaces open and active, and include those in when we do convene. It's not just the sort of top-down model, but the interactive, you know, collaborative discussion model. So Laura, I see your hand up, and then also just wanted to speak to voices we haven't heard from. Sammy, I know you're on the call. I'm not sure if this is one of your first times visiting, but thoughts you have, and Jim. But I'm going to go over to Lori in France. Thanks for joining us from Marseille.
Thank you, Eric, for the invitation. Thank you. Yes, I wanted to tell a few words about maybe my contribution in this project. I mean, what I could bring into this project. First, maybe for the one I haven't seen last time, I will give a bit of my background. So I used to be a lawyer in France, and then after I engaged myself into the environment field in 2018, and I co-founded two non-profit organizations, one which is doing climate education. The name is the Climate Fresk. In English, you can find it on internet. And the other one is, in English, the translation is a bit weird, but it is Renaissance écologique in French, which you could translate as ecological rebirth. So the first one, Climate Fresk, is more on education, and ecological rebirth is more oriented on the solutions for the transition, for the ecological transition. So what I wanted to bring into the discussion is that I think that it would be interesting for this project, for your intention, when going to COP27. What would be very interesting is to have an inventory of what we have in common as Mediterranean climate communities. So I think it would be very interesting to organize something which would illustrate very organically the common issues of all these climate, of all these Mediterranean climate regions in the world, you see? And because as this COP27 happens in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, which is on the Mediterranean area, I think we need to put the emphasis on these common issues we have as Mediterranean communities. This is the first point, and to highlight also the fact that in the Mediterranean area, we have a climate change which is happening 3 times faster than in other regions of the world. Because, I mean, it's, yes, it's happening 3 times faster. And I think this is also one of the reasons why this COP is happening in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. So this is the first point, to highlight our common issues and to find a way to illustrate this in a very organic way. I don't know how, if it's through videos, I mean, maybe we'll see this later. And then concerning food, I mean, this is one also of my big concern because I completely believe that with food, you can completely change a society. If you take the food issue, the way you eat, if you only take this food issue, you could completely change a society. That is to say, the way we work, of course, the way we eat, the way we work, the way we go from one place to another, the way we grow food, of course, because it's a big change of society. And you were saying that it's almost 50% of the impact on climate change. I mean, the data I have here in France, it's more around 30%, 1/3 of the impact, because this is 1/3 on transport, 1/3 on real estate, and 1/3 on food, on the impact. So yes, so that was my this was my point for today. I mean, I think it would be interesting that we work both on these common issues we have as a Mediterranean climate, and also work on this food issue, but how we can change a society while changing our food habits. Because for me, this food issue is not only about finding solutions from a technical point of view, but it's an whole issue about the way of life. Of course, I am French, and I'm sure that Claudia, as an Italian, would agree as well on this point. So for us, food is very important, and for sure, it's a way of life. I mean, for me, like when I used to work in a big company, I mean, the way I was eating is completely different as the way I eat now, because I cook every meal I eat now, and it makes a big difference. And I know where all the food that I eat, I know where it comes from. And I always say that you just take a meal, and you can change a society with your food.
Thanks so much, Laurie.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. And I know
Eric, I'm gonna have to interrupt for a second. I'm gonna make you the host because I have to leave. I have a meeting right now elsewhere.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Tamara, for hosting us today too. And I know we'll wrap up in a minute or two. But I wanted to thank you, Tamara, and thank you, Laurie, for sharing that. I wanted to just, if you'll indulge me, I'll share my one image that to me speaks a little bit to what you were talking about, Laurie. Can you all see that okay? So this was just, and this is the power of imagery, and this is a flat image, right? It's not even an animation, but it very visually shows how our regions are tied together. I mean, we sit in this latitudinal belt between about 30 and 45 degrees in the Northern Hemisphere and in the Southern Hemisphere. And these 5 regions have similar climates because of that, right? But we're all changing, and we're changing differently. So within each of these 5 regions, there's a different story unfolding. What Laurie just shared is that the rate of change is happening 3 times as fast in the Mediterranean basin than it is in other places. The Mediterranean body of water is much smaller, so it can heat up differently than an ocean, a vast ocean like the Pacific. The poles, we know, are also changing, their temperatures increasing much faster, which is changing the whole dynamics of the jet stream and these sort of big anomalous weather events that you get like in Texas or the heat dome over the Northwest. Those are starting to happen. But to tell that story at the macro level from the global scale, using images like this or better visualizations that are sort of over time, what's given these regions this similar climate historically, we've been pretty stable for what is it, Frank, about 20,000 years, pretty stable. And now all of a sudden we're entering a time of rapid change, and each of these regions is changing in its own unique way with its own unique set of inhabitants, both human and non-human, and having a tremendous impact on these regions. So there's a ton of stories to unpack here. But then I think to lead with this idea of resilience and food security, like we've been talking a lot about, is really, really important, because there's so much we can do to become food secure. Just the point that we talked about, Shelley and Laurie and I in conversation, and I think Claudia would resonate with her a lot, is just the way we can grow food, rather than, we've talked about it in the clean calls many times, rather than growing ornamentals here in California, let's grow food on our lawns. It's victory gardens again, but sort of, in a much bigger, at a much bigger scale. So there's opportunity to create human food security significantly by food choice, by where on the pyramid we're eating, by what we're dedicating our limited water resources to growing. There's that side of it. But then there's the natural world and that's shifting, and that's a whole nother thing to unpack and talk about. So I think there's lots we could talk about, and I think we're at the end of the call today. But again, thank you to Clean for allowing us to sort of introduce a project idea. Thanks for sharing COP experiences. Alex, Frank, both Franks in particular, yeah, we'll see you all in the coming weeks. Oh, just as sort of a follow-up, what the group of us, Shelley, Alex, Lori, Claudia, and I, and a few others that are involved in this project, we're trying to meet sort of on it. We have a standing meeting that we're potentially looking at hosting for this project. That's the hour before the clean call. So if anyone's interested, I'll stick it out on the listserv once we have sort of but just to kind of continue this conversation and look at ways that we can be involved in COP, again, whether it be to go or just to provide resources like Claudia was mentioning through Instagram and sort of digital assets that we can bring into even if it's the green zone, to start with, or the blue zone. If I'm getting my colors right, Alex, the social, the one that's not the diplomats necessarily. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I'll throw it on the listserv once we sort of have a game plan moving forward. But thanks again.
Don't worry, Eric, the colors change every COP.
Yeah, thanks. Hopefully we'll have the whole rainbow, right? We want the whole rainbow represented. So. All right, well, thanks. And yeah, thanks everyone, and see you all next
week.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, have a good day.
Thank you.
Ciao. Hi, Shelley.